Not to sound cold-hearted or anything, but, who is someone who died and had it coming to them? Victoriano Alvarez. There is an island off the coast of Mexico called Clipperton Island. In 1914, the island had a population of 100 with resupply ships coming every 2 months. When the Mexican Revolution and WW1 broke out, the ships stopped coming. By 1917 there were only 15 women and children and 1 man, Victoriano Alvarez, left alive. Many died from scurvy, while others drowned attempting to chase a passing ship for help. Being the only man left on the island, Victoriano Alvarez declared himself the king and seized all the remaining weapons on the island. He then began his tyrannical rule and would rape and murder the remaining survivors. Eventually he was killed by Tirza Rendon, who was one of his favorite victims. Shortly after this, an American ship passed by and rescued the remaining 4 women and 7 children who survived and told their story. When asked about Alvarez, the survivors claimed he had died from scurvy like the others. 2 sailors took interest to their story and investigated the island. They witnessed the horrors, making the connections to their story as they went. When they came across Alvarez's body, laying in a pool of his own blood, they exchanged no words, gave each other a nod and moved on. Source: My piece of shit stepdad kept groping and fingering me when I was 9 years old. That went on for a few years whenever I was left alone with him. When I was 12 he tried to get me to have sex. I was terrified and said no. I guess he wanted me to say okay, and when I didn't, he started panicking and locked me in the basement a few times. I was terrified and wanted to speak up but didn't, for all the reasons kids don't speak up when they should. It was 1981. My stepdad left on a business trip and I prayed to God that he would please just make him die. A few days later, my stepdad had a heart attack and died. That was one of the best days of my life. I found out an uncle-in-law had been molesting his kids for years. He would rape his mentally handicapped, I don't know if this is the right words anymore, son, and one time impregnated his daughter. She had a miscarriage, but was always off and really touchy at family events. It all made sense after learning this. He was a Marine, so played up the hero nonsense even though he never deployed. No one seemed to question him, and they had a what happens in the home stays there mentality. One day, he was road raging and picked a fight with a guy in a red vehicle, all we know. Witnesses said the two were driving after each other down a country road. Road vehicle guy apparently ran him off the road, then emptied 6.44 Magnum rounds into uncle to finish him off. No one came forward. In India, over a decade ago, some scum was going around raping women in one area. As we can expect, nothing was done. The rapist was some kind of gangster and many of his victims were Dalits untouchables. Police told the women who dared to report it that they were whores and adulterers. One day, a very cunning woman threatened to blow them up when he and his gang attacked her house. The gang was run out of town and an angry mob burned the rapist's house down. The rapist handed himself over to police for protection. Over 200 women arrived at the courthouse. When the rapist joked about one of the victims being a prostitute, the police laughed. That was it. The mob of women attacked him, led by the victim he laughed at. I can respect that truthfully. Sort of like that dad that killed his son's rapist in the airport back in the 80s, I think. Early 90s. Every person has a point where they can reach that mentality. Thankfully 99.999% of never have to experience it. For those that do, while I might not agree with their actions, I do in this case though, I can respect their choice to take those actions. Just wish we could live in a world where no one had to be a victim. Humanity could so easily create a true utopia with our technology, especially if we pooled our resources and worked alongside one another to improve that technology. If only we could all stop being cunts to one another. WTF. He raped her repeatedly when she was 12 and he was 35. When her parents wouldn't let him have her, he burned down their house and killed their dog. Also, he already had a wife, who he brought her home to when she was 14 and pregnant. He divorced his wife and married the girl to avoid the rape charges. As soon as she gave birth, she ran away with the ex-wife and baby to her parents' house. He burned their house down and killed their dog again to get the women back. Town bully is an understatement. This dude was the fucking devil and someone should have killed him sooner. Local asshole of my small hometown. Dude always swerved to hit animals. I don't think he ever succeeded in killing anyone's pets, but he fucking tried. Well, someone was outside with their dog, the owner goes inside to grab a drink, the dog is well behaved and it's sitting in the yard next to the road. Asshole comes flying down the road in his loud ass lifted truck. The owner hears him, grabs his shotgun next to the front door, and heads outside right as the asshole misses his dog and spins out across the yard. As he tries to run over the dog a second time, the owner blasts away, hitting the guy in the face the first shot. He keeps firing, hitting the front, side, and rear of the truck. The truck keeps going and runs into the ditch on the other side of the road. Asshole survived the shot, missing a significant portion of his face, lived for 6 hours in critical condition, and died in surgery. Fucking scumbag deserved it. Judge ruled in favor of the owner with no penalties or fines or anything. Fun fact, the brother was caught by police taking a shit on his asshole brother's grave. They released him LOL. His family was actually decent people, but he was such utter scum, he deserved it. I'll tell this story for my late best friend. His father had mentally abused him for a long time in his teens. Basically all through high school and before. It was so bad that at one point his father called into the school and said my friend was going to shoot up the place, which he would never do. My friend had been grounded for a whole year once if not multiple times. A couple years ago, they found his father dead in his chair, alone and bloated. To this day, I had never seen my friend more happy than when he found out his father had died alone. My husband abused me physically, sexually, emotionally, mentally, and financially for 18 years before I finally had the courage to leave. Was a severe heroin addict. Literally could not overestimate what a non-existent father he was. He made the separation hell. Just every trashy, deadbeat dad thing you've ever heard of, he did. Became a severe alcoholic, tried to get me fired, he was unemployed for 2 years at this point, threatened suicide repeatedly, multiple arrests, car crashes, more physical abuse, drug dealer girlfriends, got severely in debt, etc. etc. Then he filed a bullshit protective order against me asking that the kids be removed by police force from the only parent they've ever had to live on the floor of his 3 drug dealer siblings' apartment. He died 3 days after filing that, drove himself into a roundabout with a 2.5 blood alcohol level. Honest to God, when I woke up at 5 a.m. and saw all the missed calls, all I could think was, please just let this finally be the end. Been grateful every day since that. It was the only good parenting move he ever made, was removing himself from their lives by death. This is how I feel about my dad. He was all of the things you mentioned about your husband, except he didn't do heroin, and he went out of his way to make life a living hell for my mom after she left him. The only memories I have of him are violent ones. He fell asleep in a parking garage with his car running and died of carbon monoxide poisoning when I was like 4. My mom was so relieved and all the bad stuff just ended instantly. I've had people tell me my whole life they were sorry for my loss when they find out he died, but I never felt that way. I feel like if he hadn't died, things would have probably been a lot worse for us, and I wouldn't have put it past him to be the kind of person to have killed us all and then himself one day. Oh hey. That's one of the things that happened when I was in middle school. It had gone on for months before my mother got involved. Their parents and the assistant principal criticized me making a big deal out of something normal. My mother, ever the psychotic lady, told me afterward, if he does it again, hit him with a chair. Guess who got suspended for beating a kid with a chair? This guy. Mom was banned from the school grounds as well for telling the AP and his parents that he deserved it. It didn't stop him, but it made him too much of a bitch to come alone from then on. Oh. And he's on the sex offender registry these days. Just utter, irredeemable scum. Richard Huckle. Also known as Britain's worst paedophile, which is saying a lot when you think about it, posed as a photographer for charities and religious organizations in Asia in order to get close to children and eventually groom and rape them. He was also involved in the sex trafficking business where he helped sell many of the children into sex slavery where he also filmed and distributed CP. A true monster. Turns out, dude was capital B brutally tortured and murdered in prison in the absolute worst way possible in 2019. The details are YAAAI too graphic to write down here, but man, he got was what was coming and then some. My grandmother. She was my mother's mother. She cheated on her loving husband and he ended up committing suicide. She hated my father from the start. Tried to get him arrested a few times for things he didn't do, like possession of illegal firearms or beating me and my half-siblings. He ended up going to court a few times for some of these accusations, was proven innocent. Come to find out my grandmother had also talked my mother, also a shitty person, to claim welfare even though she wasn't entitled to it back then. My father had no knowledge of this since both of my parents had separate bank accounts. But since my parents were still married, the judge made my father pay around $30,000 back to the state of New York since my mom couldn't hold a damn job for more than a few weeks and they were still married. And here's where karma hit, my grandmother ended up getting colon cancer and died. Rolling on the floor laughing, I also just found out that my mother has been homeless for a few years and none of her 4 children, including me, want to help her because the second she gets involved, it gets ruined. My grandfather. He tried to sexually abuse me when I was 13. He attacked me and thankfully I was strong enough to fight him off successfully. He was a racist, a misogynist, and would beat me until I was bruised as a child. He got cancer and suffered greatly. Started to go into remission and then had a nasty fall in the shower that landed him in a rehab facility. He got COVID from the rehab facility and died. I never saw him or spoke to him during all these events, but it gave me peace to know that he was finally gone. I recently found out a guy I used to work with died of cancer. He must have been in his 50s. Anyway, he was always a bit full on. Then one day at a work party 12 years ago he kept trying to grab me and dance with me, grabbing my ass etc. I was sober as I was driving and tried to move away. I was 20 at the time and was tall, slim, and attractive, so used to men trying to grind at clubs, and I generally just tried to lose myself in groups with friends. This guy wasn't having any of it and weaseled his way between us and full groped me down there. I wriggled away to freedom and went home straight away. The next day at work I tried to raise it and I was told, oh, that's just him, ignore it. When I read he had died I just felt relief. Every time I hear someone say they trust in God, they always expect some sort of biblical deus ex machina or other form of divine intervention where he will perform some sort of miracle, or cause a natural disaster that will nearly kill you and cause you to rethink your plan, or smite the heathens with bolts from the blue. None of them ever consider him just sending dozens of people on your path with the advice to not do the incredibly dumb thing you want to do, or hundreds of scientists working together to create a vaccine or other medicine with unprecedentedly high potency, or sending rescue workers to evacuate you. It's the rowboat story. There was a weather report about a massive storm, but a man said, I don't need to evacuate, I'm a religious man, I pray, God will save me. The man's house flooded, so he climbed to his rooftop. A rescuer in a rowboat passed by and called out to the man, climb in and I'll take you to safety. But the man said, I'm religious, I pray, God will save me. Soon only a patch of roof remained out of the water. A helicopter came by and threw down a rope. But the man waved it off, calling up, God will save me. A few hours later, when the man stood before God in heaven, the man said, God, why didn't you save me? And God said, I sent you a weather report, a rowboat and a helicopter. What more did you want? When I was growing up there was a kid who bullied the shit out of me. Threw food at me, called me names, did all kinds of stuff a standard bully in that era, late 80s early 90s. From about 5th or 6th grade on. His mom was a huge asshole as well, might be where he got it from. Freshman or sophomore year his mommy dies and he mellows out. His mom was awful to everyone she came across that either didn't agree with her, side with her, or didn't do things the way she wanted. They made my family's life hell. Now that the husband is free from here for however many years, he is apparently a really nice guy. In recent weeks, at least 7 different anti-vaccine and anti-mask conservative activists have ultimately died in hospital settings from COVID-19 and its complications. The men were radio hosts Bob Enyart, Phil Valentine, Mark Berney, and Dick Farrell, along with former CIA officer/conspiracy theorist Robert David Steele, South Carolina GOP leader Presley Stutz, and anti-vaccine activist Caleb Wallace. All had used their platforms to push various bits of misinformation about the virus, masks and the vaccines, and all were ultimately brought low by the very virus they refused to take seriously. Sadly, several recanted of their anti-vaccine stances, in particular before passing away, but by then it was too late. Osama bin Laden. I'm shocked I haven't seen him listed here. Not only did he lead a terror organization and plan the attack on the Twin Towers, but this man told countless young men to sacrifice their life in the name of God and promised them eternal life and other riches in the afterlife for the murder and terrorization of not only Americans but people in their own country, their own kinsmen, and other innocent peoples. He literally convinced or forced children and young adults to be suicide bombers countless times for his own selfish goals, some of which sadly were for absolute nothing. Jim Jones from Jonestown. He deserves much worse than death. I'm glad he's not on this earth any longer, but what he did to those people is horrifying. He forced his cult followers Gianna to drink poison juice laced with cyanide, spelling. And he killed all the children first, so the adults that were left with no hope and would also comply. He also shot the children up with the poison with the help of sycophant nurses. All this happened after the Prime Minister of the United States came to check on the followers to see if they were safe. Jim Jones knew they would come for him, so he took down all his followers with him. 909 people died that day. The photos are horrifying. The tape recording of his last sermon as people get in line for the poison and are slowly dying is as nightmare. I bawled my eyes out listening to it as the children screamed "I'm agony." I had to hear it though. He was a psychopath and I truly wish him pain and agony in the next life. I hate him.